Hello guys, thanks for stopping by. Today is Saturday the 22nd of August 2015. Some people may remember a video that I produced a little while ago. It's now deleted, but it was on the subject of your home and the ownership of your home, more specifically. I think it's time to recap, to go back over that, some very important points that were raised, and also to link that to what does seem to be an agenda that all of the Western nations are currently following, and that is the weakening leading to the eventual planned removal of individual property rights. All of the issues surrounding property rights and home ownership and so forth are very important on an individual level, but they're also extremely important on a societal level. Most people who visit this channel will at least be aware that there is a United Nations agenda that's been signed off by all the developed nations called Agenda 21. Many people who visit this channel will also be aware that many United Nations agendas are not coincidentally either very similar to or almost exactly the same as New World Order agendas. For those who are not quite sure or can't remember what United Nations Agenda 21 is all about, it can be basically boiled down into a sentence or two, and that is the control and management of the global population under the pretext of preserving and protecting the environment. It's potentially a depopulation agenda, but it is certainly a population management agenda, in that the governments of the countersigning nations will decide where their population live and how the land of their nation is used or not used. Priority will be given to nature, and I use that in inverted commas. It's all part of the conditioning and programming of this great environmental protect the planet global warming agenda, which I'm not going to get into here. It's extremely controversial, and we need to stay focused upon the important aspects of this particular issue. And this particular issue is to do with where you and your family live. It is to do with your home. I'm going to get you to think about a very uncomfortable subject. I'm going to get you to think about a situation. It can be any situation. I'm not going to give any real specifics, but a situation in which you are compelled, for one reason or the other, to abandon your home, to abandon your place of sanctuary, not just your shelter, but your home, the place where maybe you share with your family, that you've maybe built with your own hands or worked for decades to pay for, a place where you have adapted to suit your needs, a place that you may have adapted to see you through the coming difficult period. You may have spent years stocking up your home with preparatory supplies or adaptations, rainwater harvesting, energy generation. You may have planted a garden and worked hard to see it grow. And the very thought, the very idea that you may have to walk away from it is extremely uncomfortable. Even amongst the most awake and well-prepared of peoples, this is the most difficult subject for them to consider. I know that many people talk of bugging out and having a refuge or having a secondary place of safety, etc. But psychologically, emotionally, and physically, they still remain rooted to their home, and they look upon either bugging out or moving to a place of safety as a temporary measure. But what if it's not? What if you, your friends, your family, your neighbours, your town, or even your whole city is relocated or has to relocate due to some form of crisis? It doesn't have to be a man-made crisis. It could be a natural disaster. Just look around the world today and there are millions, in fact tens of millions of people constantly on the move. They are either moving away from war zones, they are moving away from places where drought has been an issue for years and the crops will no longer grow, the soil has turned to dust, or there has been some form of other natural disaster such as a volcanic eruption, a significant earthquake, or even looking at a extremely modern and well-developed country. Look at Japan, and we have Fukushima, which is in actually now worse shape now than it was after the tsunami and the earthquake of several years ago. It won't be long now before there is an issue with Tokyo, and people will probably find themselves either feeling compelled to move themselves, or they may be forcibly relocated by the government. You don't think that will happen? Have a look at what happened with the Chernobyl disaster. A city, an entire city, was abandoned. The government sent in the troops and he gave people literally hours to pack their bags, to load their cars and go, never to return again. I'm sure that we could all think of many scenarios where we may have to abandon our home. And we could probably go quite deep with this and get very heavy. But what I'm going to do in this video, I'm just going to take it easy, I'm going to take it steady, and I'm going to just identify the most likely reason I feel that you may find yourself without a home, you may find yourself homeless. And that is due to the harsh economic reality of the times that we currently live in. It should be clear now to everyone who is awake, and that will be everyone who's taken the time and the effort to click and listen to this video, that the economy in the West is not getting any better, and it's not likely to get better in the near term. In fact, it's likely to get much, much worse. Even though this is an uncomfortable subject, even though this is something that few people would willingly want to sit and ponder, doing so now will save you significant emotional and psychological problems later on if it is forced upon you and you have never considered the implications. So if we leave nuclear power plants melting down and natural disasters, droughts, earthquakes and volcanoes and whatever out of the equation for the purposes of this video, just to try and keep it short and concise, and we just concentrate on the economic issues, let's just consider our own vulnerability to a personal economic shock. Now, this might sound like a strange or even a bold statement, but there are more people in the rich West who are closer to being homeless and living on the street than there are in the East. And that's as proportion, obviously, it's a percentage, not as raw figures, because most of the world actually live in the East. But it's because we have this great illusion of wealth in the West that people think that they could never be poverty-stricken, they could never lose their home, they could never become homeless, and certainly never end up on the street. I can't remember who said it, but somebody once said that we are just 9 meals away from chaos. That's a very wise and thoughtful statement for those who would want to consider that. But there's also another one that's similar, and it states that we are just 3 missed payments away from the street. Many preppers are well aware of the first comment, and they're well aware that hunger makes people do desperate things, and they have taken that into very careful consideration. However, I would probably suggest, at risk of going out on a limb, that the majority of preppers do not fully consider the implications of my latter statement about the 3 missed payments. If you are paying a mortgage on a house, you are required to make those payments in full on a regular basis, as agreed in the terms of the contract which you signed. Now, if you miss one payment, you are technically in breach, in default of those terms. Most mortgage lenders are reasonable, and they will allow you perhaps to miss 2 or 3 payments before they will take any action against you. They may, if they're a decent lender, offer new terms that are more manageable. However, if they're perhaps less than scrupulous, they may try and go for repossession or foreclosure to take that property from you. So basically, without going all around this issue, most people are 3 to 4 months away from becoming homeless. You miss 3, perhaps 4 payments on your mortgage, and that house will be taken from you. Your belongings will be put onto the street, the locks on the doors changed, bolts put on all the windows and doors, or even the house boarded up, and you will be denied access to that. You will lose any legal title to that property because it wasn't yours to begin with. It was mortgaged. It was owned by the bank who lent you the money to buy it. If you're renting a property, pretty much the same thing. You miss a couple of payments, you miss a few months' rent, and the landlord will be through your door, whether you like it or not, and your stuff will be out on the street. Some countries, some states have more stringent legislations than that, and they have to go through legal process. But fortunately, some people will find that the landlord retains the right of access, has a key to the house or the flat, the apartment, can let himself in, can remove your goods, can lock the door, change the lock, deny you access, and you find yourself homeless. So I'm going to dwell on that, and I'm going to make that point. In fact, I'm going to labour that point, because if you're busy prepping, if you're busy preparing for when the economic collapse hits you, but you haven't considered that you may actually lose your home, then all of those preparations that you've done, all of the preparations that you have, are going to be lost. Consider that, especially if you have invested significant sums and time and energy into adapting your home. Say, for instance, you've spent time and effort, possibly many years even, planting a kitchen garden that will produce food to supplement you and your family during hard times. If you have gone to the trouble of putting in a rainwater harvesting and collection and storage facility, if you have gone to the trouble and expense of digging a well, if you have hardened your house in some way, or even if you have simply filled a spare room or a garage with supplies, equipment, food, and whatever you think you may need to help to see you through a difficult period. Well, if you lose your home, you're not going to be able to carry those in a backpack. You're not going to be able to put them in a shopping cart. You know, you must think about this. The best preparation that you could have for this economic collapse, in my opinion, is a safe and secure home environment, one that is bought and paid for. Now, I appreciate that is a dream for most people, to have their own home paid for outright and to actually hold full title to that property, as opposed to just some form of lease or shaky agreement. To actually own your own property, for many people I know, is a dream. And I'm not trying to suggest that the only way that you're going to get through this is to have a home that is paid for outright. I'm certainly not. I'm just saying that is the ideal situation. I'm just trying to give a little bit of benefit of my own experience here as well. Some people may be aware that I lost my home, I lost my car, pretty much all of my possessions, and ended up going from the middle class straight down through the floor of the working class and into the underclass quite quickly. I had taken steps to make preparations. I'd even held some precious metals, which sadly I no longer do. It had to be sold to pay for life's necessities. But even though I don't own my own home and I am in a fairly vulnerable position, I still plan on making it through the worst of the coming collapse. I plan on making it through to the other side. You can also make it through, even if you don't own your own home, or even if you're renting. You can get yourself through by analysing your individual circumstances and situations and ability to meet your obligations and payments. Those with mortgages to pay and those who have regular rent to pay may consider that they may need to keep several months of payments in cash held safely close by, that they can make their payments and meet their obligations. They may also want to consider, if they have the means, to also store some additional means of payment in the form of precious metals. So should there be a hyperinflationary currency event or a complete economic reset where the nation's domestic currency is recalled and a new one issued, they can convert their precious metals into the new currency and continue to make the payments on their home or meet their rental obligations. I'm not giving any financial advice, I'm just giving a little bit of assistance in terms of thinking about these things. I know on the face of it, it's simple, basic information. It may even be classed as common sense. But you look around and, you speak to friends and family who otherwise intelligent people, and how much food have they got stored? Do they always look left as well as right when crossing the road? All these things are classified as common sense, yet, we don't always do them, don't always consider it, we don't always think about it. And as I mentioned towards the beginning of the video, preppers and people who should know better are some of the worst offenders here with the issue of their home and their ability to continue to live in it and to pay for it. I know that some preppers think that they, can ride through the collapse and then they'll deal with the payments later when their stack of precious metals has been revalued upwards and so forth. Well, we don't know that's going to happen. We just don't know, what is laid out. So you need to have contingencies, and you need to have contingencies for your contingencies. And the making of payments during the worst of the collapse, that is something that, we all need to consider. Maybe I ought to call it prepper's block when it comes to, the home issue, because it's something that they just don't want to consider. I found that's the hardest issue when I've spoken to people. Even if you think you already know it, it's important to recap and just to remind yourself that if you are paying a mortgage or rent and you are reliant upon a job to meet that rent or mortgage payment, then you are vulnerable. And, if the economic collapse continues to worsen, which it will do, when it reaches you, and if you have your income cut or reduced in some way, how vulnerable then are you to becoming homeless? When it's a choice between paying the mortgage and paying the rent and putting food on the table, something has to give. And it's generally the rent or the mortgage, because at the end of the day you're going to need to put food in your belly, otherwise you're not going to make it through the days for very long. So please consider what I have to say, even if you already know much of what I'm talking about and I'm preaching to the converted, as they say. Please just remind yourself of it. I think I've covered the main points that I wanted to cover in this video. I think I've met the objective to get people to think about this issue and to look at themselves very closely indeed, and to examine their own vulnerabilities to becoming potentially homeless. We've covered a lot of ground there, and it's quite difficult and heavy subject matter, so I don't want to dwell on that anymore. There's a lot to contemplate there. we've reached a natural break now. We've reached a natural conclusion to this video. However, we are not in normal times now. We are now moving towards the end game, and we don't know how much time we have left to discuss and consider these very serious subjects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press on. I'm going to press on and look at the next level to this. Consider this as the end of part 1 of this video. So if you need to have a comfort break, press pause and go and have one now, and then come back, because we're going to get even heavier on the other side. We're going to look at what comes after the collapse and the reset and the introduction of the New World Order, and the implications that is going to have on everyone having a roof over their head or not. So, on to what may be considered as part 2 to this video. We covered an awful lot of ground in part 1, some very heavy stuff that could make for quite difficult listening, and a more sensible person may have ended the video there rather than try and overload the listener with more information. But I'm also mindful that time is now short and we are drawing close now to the great reset, the great collapse, the instigation formally of the New World Order. And it may be difficult to get messages out in the future. It may be difficult to record videos, and as I mentioned in an earlier video, we may not even have access to the internet. So whilst I've got the opportunity, I would just like to circle back to what I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, and that's Agenda 21, United Nations Agenda 21, which is, without any shadow of a doubt and without even any form of cover or excuse, a New World Order agenda. I mentioned throughout this video about the importance of having somewhere to live during the darkest phases of the collapse and through the reset and the transition into the New World Order. But it's important to also consider what the world will look like after the transition, when the New World Order is rolled out. And at this stage in the game, it does appear that it will be rolled out. United Nations Agenda 21 ties in very cleverly, it's no accident that it does this, with older agendas which are linked to the much, much older New World Order agenda. And as I mentioned, part of that is to remove the ability for the ordinary person to own land or any form of property. Now this is important to know, because some people who think they own a full title and they've paid for the property outright and they've got a deed in their hands and so forth, they think that they actually do fully own that. But there's another layer of ownership that is superior to their ownership. And you need to be aware of this to see where this United Nations Agenda 21 is going and how the New World Order are going to manage populations. Receiving full title does not necessarily mean that you are the full owner of that property. You will find it doesn't really matter whether you're in the United Kingdom or the United States or any other Western nation. You will find that the state will actually have ultimate ownership of your property and the land beneath and around your property. You need to be aware of that. You need to be aware that the state has ultimate control over the land, even if you actually think you own it and that you hold some form of property deed. In some countries and some states, it's more obvious. For instance, if you want to change the use of your home, or you want to build an extension, or you want to make some form of alteration, you will have to ask the representatives of the ultimate owners, i.e. the local government, the council, whoever, the state authority, for permission to do something with what is ostensibly, on the surface at least, your own property. That's the first indicator that you may not own what you think you own. The second obvious thing is something that you own outright cannot be taxed, and something that you own outright cannot be taken for you in seizure, forfeiture, confiscation, or as they do here in the United Kingdom, it's called a compulsory purchase. If your home or your land is in the way of some government agenda, very little say in the matter, they will just compulsorily buy it from you and put the compensation in your bank, and that's it, job done. As laws become more draconian, compensation will be a thing of the past. Opposed to confiscation will come to the fore. It's a complex subject. I'm not an expert in this, and I can't even begin to try and explain the legal aspects of it. It's something that you'll have to investigate yourself, but for the purposes of this video, I'm just trying to raise awareness, to make you aware that even if you hold a farm or a ranch, or you have some land holding, or even if it's just a house on a street, if you think that you completely own that and the state can't take that from you, then you need to look at this very carefully. And United Nations Agenda 21 has given all of the Western nations tremendous power to move entire groups of people, to evict people from towns, to evict people from even entire cities, and to set them up in new towns and new cities, or even existing cities in high-rise blocks and very cramped and limited accommodation elsewhere. And wherever you choose to base yourself during the initial phases of the collapse, the reset, the transition into the New World Order, it will affect you. Agenda 21 will affect you afterwards. What's important to bear in mind is that they're not going to go straight to the blunt instrument stage to move people. They're going to do it softly at first. In fact, they are already doing it now, because Agenda 21 is already in play in many places around the world, and it has been for some years. They're already laying the groundwork for the movement of people from rural areas, and particularly national parks, or areas close to national parks, but any significant rural area. It's already in play to get people to voluntarily move. And I'll give you an example, for instance. Now, thinking at the top of my head, so excuse me if I miss a few of the steps out, but say, for instance, the government wanted to clear a particularly interesting part of a country that was rich and diverse in minerals and materials and nature and animals, and they decided that they wanted humans out of the area. So, using these environmental protection laws and legislations and acts that we all have now, and we're all encouraged to support, because who wouldn't want to protect the environment? Who wouldn't want to look after the poor little animals? All of these acts, laws and legislations slowly work together. And let's just take heating, for example. In this area that is rich and diverse, and lots of fluffy animals everywhere, it's way too nice, way too good for humans to live in. The government want the people out, and they don't want to use the blunt instruments. So, first of all, they'll increase taxation in that area. Then they may also move any government offices and departments, i.e. they will move the jobs away from the area, which will then in turn affect the local economy and cause further natural voluntary migration away from that area. There will of course be the diehards that decide to stay there. They will stay come what may, and the government then go to the next stage of the environmental protection legislation, and they will say, for instance, all of those open fires that you have that are using coal, we're going to ban coal because it's bad for the environment, it causes global warming. That will affect a few people, but most will probably just move to wood-burning stoves. So, what's the next step? The government then say, wood-burning stoves are bad for the environment, and we're going to ban them. You must be connected to the grid now for your heating. Well, a few people, that won't be a problem if they're particularly near a town and they're close to the main supply grids for gas and electricity. But those who live further away can't connect to the gas mains. They will find it difficult to draw their power from the aging infrastructure from the electricity grid that supplies their area. So they're going to struggle, and that's the idea. In fact, in the winter, many of the people just won't be able to tolerate the cold if they can't use their old coal fires or their old wood-burning stoves, and they can't draw enough electricity to heat all of the new electrical heaters they've installed. Or even if they can draw the electricity, they may not be able to afford to pay for it because it is extremely expensive to use the electrical heating, particularly if the winter is severe. So, just after a couple of hard winters, chances are that people will decide to sell up and move away, further clearing of that area, which of course further affects the local economies, it further affects the infrastructure. There's no incentive for anybody to maintain the roads and the infrastructure as well as it was in the past. The shops start to close, the supply lines for basic resources now to that area become stretched, and it makes life there very hard. Young people move away, and the population that is left is the aging population, and once they die, that area will not be reoccupied and it will be effectively cleared. And that's how these simple things work. I just gave one example of heating. Imagine, with all of the power, with all of the mechanisms that a state has available to them, just how easily they can affect the mass migration of peoples just by changing a few rules. And I'm bringing this up and I'm stressing this because it is all related to the issue of keeping your home after the great collapse and the reset which is coming. We discussed in the earlier parts of the video about payments and so forth and getting you through that with a roof over your head. But we do need to discuss what comes on the other side. And it's not going to be like it is now on the other side when the New World Order is in full swing. If the governments can affect such change now, if they can impose their will upon people to the extent that they do now, and they're not even, tightening the knots, they're not even tightening the noose around us, then just imagine what they can do when the gloves come off and there's no pretense anymore that they have to follow certain laws and legislation and human rights. That you can realize just how dangerous and insidious the United Nations agendas are when considered against the New World Order agendas and the situations that we currently find ourselves in around the world today. When that phase is initiated, it will not matter if you hold full title to your property. It will not matter whether you are up to date with all your payments. You will be moved. And this is something that you will have to always keep in the back of your mind for the years ahead. You will have to be aware that when a government wants a population to move, then that population will be moved one way or the other. What I'm trying to say here is, do not expect to be living in the same place, the same home that you are living now in 10 years' time. The world is going to be a very, very different place. And it's not just me predicting that. If you go over to the Deagle.com website, which regardless of what they try and say, it is linked to people associated with the New World Order, their population projection for 2025 shows massive migration of peoples from the West and massive depopulation, combination of natural die-off, reduced births, and migration to other parts of the world. This is what you need to do at this stage in the game. You need to change your mindset. You need to think about things that are extremely uncomfortable, things that are very difficult to deal with. Surviving the worst phases of the economic collapse and the reset is only the first part of this game. And I call it a game because that is how the New World Order people view this. They view it as a game. This is deep and heavy stuff, and I don't want to disturb people. I don't want to upset people, but I do want them to think. We're getting towards the phase now that we have all been preparing for and that we've been warned about for a long time. It's getting close now, and although a lot of people feel capable and prepared for surviving the transition, they have not thought about living on the other side. They think after the collapse, after the reset, after the instigation of the New World Order, it's going to be boom time again. Well, I'm sorry, that is not going to be the case. Think post-economic collapse, Soviet Russia. Think Ukraine. Greece is nothing in comparison to what it's going to be like. It's the Warmer Pact. It's not even that. It's the guys, the roadies, putting the equipment on stage. Not even begun to warm up yet. This is going to be hard, and I'm stressing it, and I really am labouring this point and going on because it might be the last chance that I get to do this. We don't know how long the internet is going to stay up for. Okay, that's enough. That's even heavy now by my standards. Let's wrap this up. I've spoken for long enough. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground. We've got at least 2 videos in one here, possibly even 3. Let's wrap it up. I thank you for listening to this. I do appreciate it's been difficult to listen to. It's been difficult to talk about this stuff, to be honest. It's not easy for me to put this onto tape, to record it. But it needs to be said. There's not enough people out there getting the message across that surviving the collapse, the transition and the instigation of the New World Order is just part of this. It's just part of the story. It's what comes after. And I hope I've at least seeded a few minds to consider that if you haven't already. So, thanks for listening, and until next time, take care.